Okay, great. Thanks, Wendy. And welcome to everyone. I'm excited to talk with you about this captions for this new competition. As Wendy said, I am a teacher in the writing program here at UCSB, and my focus is on STEM writing and especially on science writing for the public. So I'm really interested in all aspects of how to speak to a wider audience. My degrees are in writing, but my focus has always been also on STEM communication. So this kind of art and science competition is really exactly within my wheelhouse and the things I love to talk about. So I'm happy to be here with you today, and I hope what we'll talk about will be helpful for you as you create, revise, and submit your captions. So what we'll do is I'll look for you and talk through a lot of samples and talk about what's working and what's not working in some of the samples. And then about midway through, you'll have some chance to either start brainstorming if you haven't started your writing, or to start or to draft and revise if you brought something that you've started. And then we'll do a really brief sharing of what you have in groups of 2 or 3. So don't stress out about that. If you can just sort of show your image and chat in brief about it with somebody. It's not going to be anything difficult or embarrassing. And then from 5 to 5:30, if there are more questions or if people want to do more workshop, we can do that as well. So we have that extra time. However, please do raise questions either by raising your hand, your virtual or your real hand, or by talking in the chat. And then throughout, I will also be encouraging you to have some discussion. I'm not sure with this smaller group if that will work out, and if not, that's okay too, but I definitely encourage you to voice your ideas as we go along, and I'll do my best with your names. All right, so let's see. I'm going to start with the sort of first thing that you will do. So you may have already looked at this submission page, but it gives you 2 different paragraphs that you can write, one called the artwork caption and one called the second caption. The first is required and the second is optional. So you really do have quite a bit of space to explain what you have done in your artwork and to connect that with some other ideas. I would also encourage you to think about both of those paragraphs as one unified whole. So even though you submit it as 2 paragraphs, think about it as one whole. And all of the examples that I'll be showing you will be in that kind of format. So this example here is from another competition that we have here, the Art of Science competition. And this is something we've had for a couple of years. I'll be using those examples throughout, and I apologize that it's not exactly the same as the quantum competition that you guys are doing, but I think the principles will be the same, and I'm hoping that this will be a good substitute. And then maybe if you come back next year, I can use your good examples in my next workshop. So as you can see here, you've got a decent amount of text. You've got the title and then the 2 paragraphs. For any writing that is new or challenging, the best way to work on it is to look at examples. And so let me put this URL in the chat. So we've got years worth of images and captions up there from the Art of Science competition. So I encourage you after the workshop to look through a bunch of them, find ones that are maybe similar to the kind of either similar to the science or similar to the ideas that you want to write about, and really closely see what it is about those that you think are working, what's making them not work as well, that's a really good way to get started. And also a way, if you feel like you're not sure what to do next, sometimes looking at those examples can be really helpful. All right, so we'll come back to this example. But first I want to talk in a slightly more general way about the judging criteria. So the competition gives you just one sentence about what they want for the caption, and they would really like that the science is communicated in a clear and engaging way. So you're connecting the image and your science in a clear and engaging way, which is helpful, but also not very specific, and we might not be clear about what makes something clear and engaging. So I do want to talk about that a bit. And I want to start with a smaller aspect of the caption, the title. So here are some samples, again, from the Art of Science. This is 2020, and these are all of the winners and honorable mentions from 2 years ago, which is the last time that we had that competition. So I'm curious, as you look at these, you may look at see some of the images that may really stand out to you, and that may encourage you to like click into them, but especially looking at the title, which is in blue in these images. I'm wondering which ones are intriguing. Like, so you've got 8 choices. Which one would you click first in terms of being interested in the title? And so you can raise your hand or just call out or type in the chat if you have something to say. What do you think?
I will choose the second one, second place.
Okay, why is that?
It's colorful.
Okay, it's colorful. And I think that's partly what got it for second place. What about just in terms of the writing, though, the caption?
Oh, you mean the caption? Okay.
Or the title, I guess we call it. So this third one is cut off a little bit, but it says, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. So that one using a little bit of humor. Anyone else see one that they think is interesting? Okay, so yeah, so Wendy is saying the image gets your attention first, absolutely. And then the title should be short yet engaging. That's a great thing to mention. Short is better. So with this third one, it's so long that it gets cut off in this view, but that's not the artist's fault. That's just kind of random the way that it's ending up being displayed. And in this case, it's such an interesting title and a good joke that I would say if you have something like that, it's okay if it's a little bit longer, but all other things being equal, it's good to have a shorter title. The other way that I would talk about what's happening here with these titles is that it's showing a focused idea, but one with expansive possibilities. And so that's really your first goal in writing your whole caption, is you want some kind of organizing principle, some kind of abstraction that will connect your science and explain your science in an interesting way. And so here you can see that people have chosen to, for example, refer to popular culture. The Electric Avenues is actually a song from, I think, the 80s. And so that writer was referring to that song. Some other writers are using emotions, like that People's Choice one with everyone needs a support system. And then others are describing the image in a pretty direct, literal way. In the second panel there, we have the honorable mention. It's in the eyes, just really describing what most people are going to see in that image. So the next thing, let's look more now at how that expansive idea might be enacted and developed further in the description in the other paragraphs. So this one, water lilies, is, I think, quite a clear example of an idea that connects on multiple levels, connects to culture, connects to a rather famous painting that many people have seen. And it also connects the larger idea, the image of the painting, to the specific science behind how the image was made, talking about gallium nitride. The other thing that you might notice here is that it works on maybe 3 different levels. So, for example, this gallium nitride is often coined growth. When it's the creation of it, it's coined growth. And so it's analogous to flowers in that way, in addition to having the structures themselves be flower-like, and then finally circling back to all of them together happen to, rather astoundingly, create this image that looks like a painting. So there's a lot to think about there, and a lot of interesting stuff going on that your reader is really going to be able to sink their teeth into, while at the same time learning some interesting things that they would not normally be learning about. All right. So that was a final draft. And I think sometimes when you're looking at a good example, it's harder to see how it got there. So I also want to look at some first drafts and talk about how they could be improved, what kind of revisions could be created. And also to highlight that when you go to write your caption, it will probably look something more like this. And in general, I encourage you to write quickly and then go back and revise rather than writing slowly, because that can sometimes get you more into sort of a writer's block kind of situation. So here we've got a different image, a sea of lipid flowers. I'm wondering what your sort of reader response is to this. Like, what do you think about it? What maybe could be changed? How might audiences respond? What do you think? Any responses for what might be, what's different, like compared to the previous one? They're both about flowers, which I actually didn't intend to be true, but ideas? So the first thing that I would think about when looking at this example is the level of the audience's knowledge. So when we're thinking about this kind of writing for the general public, it's sometimes hard to decide, well, what are people really going to know? And that's, of course, you just need to make an educated guess. You're not going to know for sure. One thing I think is helpful is for this level of writing to think about an undergrad at maybe at a UC who is maybe a humanities major. So you've got someone who is quite educated, who has fairly recently gone through quite a few science classes, right, if they're at UC, but yet it's not really their specialty. They may have forgotten a fair amount, etc. So in other words, they will probably know basically what a lipid is, right? They'll have some idea of that. So it would be fine to have, a sea of lipid flowers as the title and to talk about lipids in the first sentence. When we're getting into inverse hexagonal phase, though, that might be a little bit off-putting. And especially in the first two sentences, those are the two sentences where people are most likely to read. So if that's true, you want them to be most available to a general audience. So that very first sentence, this abstract image is of a positively charged lipid in its inverse hexagonal phase. That might not say very much to a lot of people. It just might not communicate very much. So I would switch out some of that language. The other thing that's happening here is that, unlike the previous example, none of the connections are being made with keywords, and they're not being made explicitly, right? So we have this image, and then we hear that the author is saying it's a sea of lipid flowers, and it kind of looks like flowers. So, okay, that's fine. But then when we start reading it, there's nothing really about the lipid flowers. And so we're losing a connection there right off the bat. And for a reader, that's pretty disorienting, right? So all of a sudden it's looking like I'm put into a textbook rather than an art exhibit. So getting more connection to the broader image right in that first sentence would be a great idea. So let's see. So you can think of this as, what questions might the audience have? And this is what I was just talking about. Here's her revision. So this is a little longer. I'm going to read it. As seen in the image, these lipids appear as a field of flowers. This reflects the process of how water induces changes in the texture of lipids, similar to how a flower blossoms as it absorbs water. So actually, let's stop there for a second. I hope you can see a really big difference from the first example. So we see a reference to the image, but also we're connecting back to the title. And then in the second sentence, we're getting right into an integrated and cohesive way of talking about the process, the scientific process, and then how that connects to the larger idea and the image of the flowers. Then the writer does go on to define lipids in a pretty general way, just to remind people, and that's not always a bad idea. But notice also that she chose to wait to do that until later in the paragraph. And so that the first paragraph is a maybe more general overview, and then you can get into more details in the second paragraph. And this is also a very good paragraph because we're getting to quite a bit of scientific detail. Each sentence is really building on the previous sentence. So we have a definition of lipids, what do they do? Then how can they be used? Putting in those applications, great for a general audience. And then an elaboration on what would we be trying to do? Like what would make a useful lipid? How could we make lipids that could be more useful? The efficiency is based on specific phases. And then the phases are governed by their interaction with water. Now we're looping back to this metaphor of the growing flowers and the larger idea. Uh, so just to reiterate, those first two sentences, you really want to think of your broadest audience, and that the technical terms then can be moved down to later in the description. She still talks about inverse hexagonal phase, doesn't go into a lot of detail about that, but does put it in there for those viewers who would be familiar with it. And then all the connections are really explicit. And I would say that's what makes an excellent caption different from a good caption. And I would call that cohesion, that you've got cohesion between the image and the title in the first sentence and the image, and then the science and the larger idea connected on multiple levels. So let's look at another one. So this is from 2020. This was a writer that I worked with to revise her caption. And as you can see, her first draft is really quite good. It's, a lot of interesting things going on there. And but it's quite a bit more difficult than the other two that we were looking at, right? So that the connection to flowers might be pretty obvious. Of course, other people are familiar with it. That's probably on the sort of the easier level. Here, she's got quite a bit of complexity that she wants to convey to the reader. And she's got a more abstract metaphor, right? Her electric avenues metaphor, and sort of linking that into the song and trying to explain what are these avenues. So I'll read this just to make sure that we're looking at it closely. And also, by the way, reading your work out loud is a great idea. You can often catch a lot of issues that you might not catch if you don't read it out loud. So especially, for example, you can catch long sentences if you get to sort of feel kind of out of breath when you're reading. All right, electrogenic bacteria have the ability to produce electricity as they digest food. Electrons pass through the microbes and discharge onto external surfaces such as electrodes. Creating a 3D conductive scaffold provides more avenues to collect the microbes' electricity for emerging applications. Scanning electron microscopy was used as cross-sections of a microconductive polymer composite after 1 week of collecting biocurrent. The conductive matrix, false-colored blues and purples, spontaneously forms from a water-soluble polymer, encapsulating the electrogenic bacteria Shawonella onudensis MR1, false-colored lime green. By increasing the number of microbes connected to an electrode, we can realize applications such as microbial fuel cell water treatment, where microbes can eat the waste and produce electricity. So let me start with good things that are happening there. So she's got a definition right off the bat about electrobacteria, like what is that? So that's great, helping the reader. It also has some practical applications in there, sort of answering the reader's question of, like, why should I care about this? How might this relate to my everyday life? But it's a pretty dense paragraph. It's there's going to be a lot of things that your average reader are not going to be able to follow. And then the other thing, to go back to one of the things we were looking at so much before, there's not much connection to the image in the very first part of the paragraph, right? So when we first read those first couple sentences, I'm not sure, where, first of all, where's the avenue? What are we actually looking at? How does that to the text? And then some quite long sentences later on in the draft. So here's part of her revision. This is just her first paragraph. I didn't put the second paragraph on there, but she chose some interesting strategies. First, much shorter sentences, more concrete, some details are removed, but important information is. Now, in order to do that, she did something unusual in that she took out the definition. So electrogenic bacteria are not specifically defined here, which I think is certainly a reasonable decision to make. You might think of, an educated college student being able to figure out that word just from familiarity with, how scientific terms are created. And then it's also implied in that sentence. So when electrogenic bacteria, electrons pass through them, charge onto external surfaces such as electrodes. Okay, I got a message that my internet is unstable. So I'm going to pause for a second. I've noticed that when I get that message, it means that I already cut out earlier. So if that's true, I can go back. Wendy, do I need to do that?
You have been cutting in and out a little bit, but I think that if you can probably keep going.
Okay.
Although it seems maybe better now. I don't know.
Okay, so apologies. I'm sorry about that. That's been a downside of Zoom. We're all finding our connections. Our connections were as good as they were. Okay, so let me see. Let me go back here. So making things more concrete is really one of the best revisions did, and especially that second sentence where she's saying, okay, where are the bacteria? They are colored green. Okay, we can look back to the image and what's going on there. Okay, they're self-assembling with this polymer, so on this kind of avenue that's blue and purple, and then she does connect that back to her term. The resulting 3D structure increases bioelectricity, providing more electric avenues to collect the microbes' electricity for emerging applications. So in the second sentence or third sentence, she's getting the applications in there, answering the question, why do we care about this? And then in the next couple sentences, she talks more specifically about the wastewater treatment, highlighting the fact that why would we really want these bacteria that produce electricity? One of the reasons is that they can do double duty. They can eat the waste and produce electricity at the same time. So we're getting good information about the applications there. Oh, just realized. So in this final example, before we move to looking at what you brought in, this sort of putting it all together, looking at what makes this example clear and engaging, should see a lot of the same kinds of things that we've been talking about. This writer was really excited to revise her material, and she spent a lot of time on it. What I like most about this is that we really see, she helps the reader see the image in a different way. So you might look at the first title, everyone needs a support system, and you might look at the image, and that connection might not be clear. But if you read the description, that should become clear. So I'm just going to talk through it and then show you the different points that it relates to. So everybody needs a support system, even cells at a microscopic level. So great for really broad audience. Everyone's going to be able to understand it, and it's connected to something that just all humans would experience. This image illustrates two types of brain cells, an astrocyte red and a neuron green. So great explicit referencing to the image. Now we're going to be able to start digging into that image. Astrocytes are the most abundant cell type in the central nervous system, especially make it possible for neurons to function, both physically and metabolically. So terms are minimized, but they're not ignored, right? You're going to need to have some terms. They're defined when they are needed and chosen well. Here we see a representation of that support. The red astrocytes extensions look like arms embracing the green neuron. At the end of these extensions, we see astrocyte end feet, which are known to contact blood vessels and fully sheath the brain vascular system. So the abstract idea of this support system is intimately connected with these precise scientific details, and it's helping us to understand more about the image and the science in a very full way. Then she goes into a couple of sentences about how the image is made. And gives us a nice analogy, saying that the image can be thought of like a candid photograph or a still from a video. So it's just this little snapshot of what's going on in the lab. And then because there's so many thousands of cells, this image that shows this precise contact is rather magical and almost gives the impression that the cells are sharing a special moment, she says. So she's got analogies to help with the new concept of how this might work in the lab. The last sentence is returning to the larger abstract idea, so we get that really full sense of cohesion. And then, of course, all parts are really cohering, and it's telling a story. We've got this very fully developed analogy. So I hope these examples will be helpful as you sort of think through your next stages. I recommend that you use a very specific writing process. Often we try to write slowly and perfectly, and that actually takes longer probably than to write quickly and to go back and revise. So I encourage you to use that kind of a process. For right now, let's take 5 minutes or so to do that very first step if needed. So take a few minutes to think about your image, jot down some associations. If you have done that already, do maybe some more free writing just to try to generate ideas. And I would try to generate more text than you need and then cut it down. So here's some questions to think about as you're working. After about 5 minutes, we'll do breakout rooms and maybe do more than a partner. Maybe we'll do 3 just to help make things work a little bit better. So I'm going to be quiet for a couple of minutes and give you a chance to work. And then I'll make breakout rooms and give you a chance to talk, which I think is also the best way to create better writing. So we were rapidly losing people. Perhaps they had to go for various reasons. And I know that also people are at different stages. Maybe some people aren't necessarily going to apply for sure to the competition. So I'm wondering, for the two of you who are left, what would you rather do? Should we chat a little bit about your ideas? Do you want to just talk together in a breakout room? Or I could go on and continue with a lecture about a couple of other things to work on. You can write in the chat if you don't feel comfortable speaking. Okay, so unless you, well, let me go on to talking about a couple of other things. All right. So this next thing that I want to talk about is a fairly general writing strategy, but that is often overlooked and can really help with clarity. So we're moving away from the more like big picture kinds of things with science communication. This is something that is good for any kind of writing, almost. It's good for academic writing too. So take a look at these two paragraphs. Read them to yourselves, and then in the chat, write one or two to tell me which paragraph you think is easier to read. Wendy says two. Okay, how about the others? And we've got another two. Okay, by you, how about you? Two as well. Okay, so it's unanimous. Two seems to work better. So this is what the majority of readers will tend to decide, is that two is easier to read. And people will decide that even if they're not sure why it's easier to read. But of course, as writers, you've got to know why, so that you can replicate it and help your readers as well. Anybody want to take a stab at what it is about that second paragraph that makes it easier to read?
My stab at it would be that the first sentence sets it up like we're going to talk about black holes in space, And then the next sentence for paragraph number 2, like the first thing, it tells you the black hole, it brings you back to that concept. So there's a nice link. And with the first paragraph, I have to like start reading the second sentence and trying to figure out what it's going to be about. And then at the end, they say black hole again. So I say, oh, okay. But the second one is just easier for me as a novice to keep the flow.
Okay, great. That was really well articulated. Absolutely. That you in general, you want to have the beginnings of your sentences link back to the ends of your previous sentences. And as a writer, since you know where you're going with your sentence, it's sometimes easy to forget that your reader is not sure where you're headed when your reader starts a sentence. And so in that first option, second sentence, if the reader doesn't already know that the collapse of a dead star is referring to a black hole, then your reader is not sure. They might think we're going on a tangent. And of course, they can figure it out. It's not like a disaster. It's not something ungrammatical, but it is going to slow down comprehension, and it's going to make things rough for readers. And so that's the kind of thing that we just always want to smooth out as much as possible to achieve maximum communication and fluidity. In this example that we have here, it's a pretty sort of simple example. And actually the revision is also simple in that the writer is repeating the key word. Talking about black holes at the end of sentence 1, a black hole is created in sentence 2. So that won't always be quite so obvious or so easy, but in general, using that method for organization and continuity, where you have each sentence linking to the previous sentence, I think you'll find that helps increase clarity in a bunch of situations. So we've touched on some analogies as we looked through those samples, but I just want to highlight them again, just in terms of any kind of science communication for the public. So apologies for using a bio example here rather than a quantum example, but I think this is a nice metaphor where the writer's talking about something quite abstract. He's talking about these different types of cells. And in that second sentence there says, CD4 plus cells are sort of like the generals of the immune system. They give the orders about who and what to attack to the foot soldiers, which in this scenario are the CD8 plus cells that do the actual killing. So we're getting a nice analogy from something abstract to something concrete, and also to something that everybody can understand. Those kinds of concrete things will also help with memory. People tend to remember things that they can visualize like that. So always use analogies when you can for complex ideas. And then we talked about reducing technical terms, but there's 2 good strategies for dealing with technical terms when you feel you need to use them in science communication. One is to define the term right after you use it. So I think we did see that in some of the examples. Here, we've got an example where the writer is using a parenthetical definition, which is an elegant way to explain it, and is also defining the idea before the term in this first one. So pieces of proteins called peptides. And then in the second version, we've got something a little bit similar. 2 main kinds of T cells in the body. Scientists often distinguish between different kinds by referring to various distinctive proteins termed receptors. So they're explaining pretty general language and then restating the concept with the technical term in the sentence. So we've only been able to touch on, a few sort of overview principles, but I hope that you'll find that helpful as you go to revise. I hope you do submit. Everyone should submit. There's no reason not to, and I hope you have fun doing so. I'm happy to stay on the call and answer questions or talk further about your particular work. Otherwise, I hope you have a good rest of the day, and good to talk to you about science communication.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing with us some really great tips. I know that each year, not Art of Quantum is new, but with the Art of Science, there are some captions that really just increase the impact of the art in a way that makes it so much more beautiful. So thank you for just articulating sort of those tips and tricks to help us think about titles, about cohesion, use of analogies, and just how to, I guess, get started. You gave that graphic about the prescriptive writing and just starting with brainstorming. So just we will be putting this video up on the website. So if you want to look at it again and check out the flow charts for how to go about writing the caption, that's great. So thank you so much. I will stop the recording.